Welcome to Spring Boot Lectures. In the previous lecture, we saw how to create a Spring Boot application through Initializer as well as through Eclipse IDE. So now we will look into important topics to build our REST APIs. So in the REST API, you have a request, API request made. API request made and then it goes to a layer called as presentation layer. Presentation layer is also called as controller. So it consumes the API request through REST APIs and then it passes the control to service layer. So service layer is where we have all the business logics which are written, and then we'll go to the data layer and we will then connect to the database. In our lectures, we will be using MySQL database. And then after getting the data from the MySQL, what will happen? It will give the data to the data layer, then it goes to the service layer, then it goes to the controller. Through controller, it goes to the whatever API it requested to the service it goes. Now, let's go to our IDE. So, in the IDE, we see this Spring Boot application at the rate Spring Boot application. What is this all about? Let's go inside Spring Boot application. So here you can see some three important annotation which are Spring Boot configuration, enable auto configuration and component scan. So the Spring Boot configuration internally uses the component configuration. So at the rate configuration, it is used to provide configuration as a Java based configuration. You can configure either as a XML based or a Java based or annotation based. So you can create some class and annotate it as at the rate Spring Boot configuration or at the rate configuration to act that particular class as a Java based configuration. Then we have something called as enable auto configuration. Enable auto configuration. Whenever we have a Spring Starter web dependency in the class path, we can enable auto configuration in all the classes. Then you have something called as component scan. It will scan the entire application inside to get all the packages and to get all the component inside the base package as well as the sub packages. So these are the three annotation which we have: Spring Boot configuration, enable auto configuration, and component scan, which are important to make our Spring Boot application. This enables our Spring application to look into all the components and have it in a container, and also we can enable the auto configuration and we can make it either as a Java configuration or a XML based or annotation based. So this is all about the Java application, which is a Spring Boot application. Now we will see how to deploy this particular structure, the controller layer, service layer, and the data layer. So we will go to our IDE. Now from this com.galaxy, we will create a package called as controller. Finish. And then you can create one more package as service. You can create one more package as service galaxy dot service impl service impl. Finish. And then we will have something called as to hold all the entities. We will have one more package called dot entities. And then we can have package called as DAO. Okay, coming to your base thing, which is a data layer. So for that, we will create a new class called as student. We will remove the constructor. Now, student will have three attributes. We will keep them as private. Int student ID, then private string student first name, private string student name, private int age, student age. So these are the properties that a class has. So I mentioned in our previous lectures that we have something called as Java bean. So to have it as a Java bean, we want getters and setters. So getters and setters we can define either like this by generating the boilerplate code or by just annotating it with @getter, @setter, @no args constructor, all args constructor, toString. So all these things will do the same job. Getter setters will generate getter setters method. No args constructor will give you constructor without arguments. All args constructor will give you the constructor with all the arguments, and toString method will generate the toString method. So instead of doing all this, you can also do as @data. So you know that Spring has something called as dependency injection and inversion of control. Inversion of control, when you give the control to the Spring framework itself to manage all the object creation and deletion of them, garbage collecting, all the things to it. It is inversion of control, and you have these beans created and stored inside the Spring container, which can be application context, which is an interface. Now, for it to Spring Framework to know that this is a particular class or a entity that is connected to the database, we have something called as @entity. Entity, it will mark the Java class as an entity, which is typically represented as a table inside relational database. So, in this context, what happens is the JPA, it will define it as a persistent entity, meaning instance of this class can be stored in a database. So it will tell that whatever instance we get from this particular class can be stored inside the database. So it is declared, the @entity is declared that instance of this class will be managed by JPA and also can be stored inside the database. You have something called as @table. @table specifies the details of that database table that will be mapped to this particular entity. You can customize various aspects of the table, such as name. You can give a name to it as a student. Sorry, student. What happened? Student. Okay. And other things like indexes, and unique constraints all can be specified through this table annotation. So now we have entity and we define it as student table. Now every table will have a primary key. Is it or not? Primary key is very important. So to indicate this particular thing is a primary key, we will define this as ID. ID indicates that primary key of this entity will be this particular property. And we have something called as generated value. Generated value specifies how the primary key should be generated for the entity. So we can give the strategy for it. We can define a strategy for it called as we have generated type. You have auto, identity, table, sequence and none. Identity in the sense it has auto increment for the column in the database. Sequence is when you have a sequence followed in the database. Then you have table. You will have a separate table to maintain all these current value of primary key. And auto will have all these identity, sequence, table, everything, and it will choose whatever is applicable for the database that you are using. And we have none. Now we will use identity as our generated type. So this is all about your entity class, and we will see how to connect this to the controller and the service layer in the later sessions. Thank you. Welcome to Spring Boot Lectures. In this video, we will go through controller and service to link to our database. Let's go to IDE. In our controller package, we will create a new class called as student controller. Let's create one more service inside the service file, which is student service. So here student service is an interface. Then we'll go inside the service IMPL and create one more class, which is student service IMPL. This implements student service. So you have your controller service IMPL. For the Spring framework to know that this is the controller or this identify this component, we have to provide something, right? That is nothing but a @REST controller. What is @REST controller? It is combination of @controller plus @response body. @controller, this REST controller is useful for creating RESTful web services. This indicates that the method within this class are designed to handle HTTP requests and produce the response directly, typically in the format of JSON or XML. This is the function of the REST controller. Next, we have something called as request mapping. @request mapping. So what is this request mapping? It is used to map the URL path to the controller method. In the simple terms, it is like a signpost that tells your application which Java method should handle a particular web address. It helps your program to understand where to go and what to do. we can give student. So you guys know what is REST controller and REST mapping. Now what we'll do, we will create a method which will which will post something, which will save something to the database. So what we'll do, and we also have something called as cross origin. What is cross origin? Cross origin, it is like telling your browser that it's okay for this particular part of website get data from other websites. So we are allowing data from other website to be accessed within this service. So it provides a convenient way to map the HTTP methods to specific methods in the controller. Now you can give star. So it tells that it is a global, whatever service you want, it can be accepted. Now we can define a method. Public, first we'll send string, get students method, and we will return hello. At the rate get mapping. So these things, get mapping, post mapping, put mapping, and delete mapping, these annotation provides a convenient way to map HTTP methods to specific methods in the controller. Now the get mapping will handle the get request. So get will give slash get students. We will hit this particular URL from Postman. Go to your Postman. You have a get method. So now I already have the URL, which is HTTP 1991. We changed it, right? Members. Instead of members, you have a student get student. Now send the request. It is telling not found. We'll see on which particular port this application is running. It is running on 1991. 1991 is correct. And then you have in the controller, you have student, you have get students. So send. So now you are able to get hello from the controller. So now this is the get method. Now what we'll do is we will write a method which will accept student entity from the student details from the API request and saves to database. So we will define that method. Now anyway we have student class which has student ID, first name, last name, and student age. Student identity will be your primary key, so you have it auto generated. Now you also have something called as column, which will actually give the details of the columns in the database table. You can specify name. You can give specific name of the database column and map to the particular entity property in the class. And then you can define whether it is nullable, whether it can have a null values or not, length property which specify the length of the string, unique property which will give whether the column must have a unique constraint across all the rows in the table. All this can be given through this. So name equal to student, we will give the same thing, student first name, same we will put for all the things, student last name, student age. Now we will create one class inside DAO, new class called as student request. Finish, and it will have student, okay, it will have all these things. C, control B, and you have this column control D, control D. You don't want all those things. And you will have 2, control shift O, and you will give all the getters and setters. Getter, the rate setter. Okay. So now this is the student request, this is the student, and then inside the service we will have one method which is known as private. It will return, okay, we will create one more class called as student response. Finish. It will also be similar to this. At the data, at the data, and you have to mention component given on this particular thing. At the component. Now coming to your service, your interface, this will return student response save student. It will take student request, student request, student request. This is the same method. Okay, 1 second. New, we will create one more interface. Student service enter. Okay. Refactor, rename it as. Now, here we should annotate with service so that the container can be formed. And we will write private student response save student taking student request, student request. Now what we'll do, we'll go to the student service IMPL. We will implement, give the option add unimplemented methods. Now, whatever we have from the student request, we need a student. We want student. Since we require the bean here, we will annotate this with auto-wired, auto-wired. What is auto-wired? It is used for automatic dependency injection in the Spring. That means your student is an entity being there in the container. We will tell, give me the student bean here. So by telling @auto-wired, you will tell the Spring container to provide me the student whenever it is required. It makes this annotation @auto-wired makes a constructor or field or a method as a auto-wired by Spring Dependency Injection Facility. Now what we do is, now we are saving a student. Now from the student response, student dot set. So student dot set first name equal to student response dot get student response dot get request dot get student first name. In the similar manner, student dot set last name, student request dot get last name, and then student dot set student age. Next you have student request dot get age. So now you have all this, but you need something to save, right? Save it to database. So for that we have something called as repositories. We will create one more package called as .repositories. Inside the repository, you will go tell new interface student repositories interface called as student repository. So this will extend JPA a repository, and it will take two things. One is the entity student, and what is the type of primary key? It is an int. IDs, and we give it as integer. Now inside the IMPL, what we'll do, we will call this repository, student repository, student repository, and we need to hire it. In our repository, we need to annotate it with @repository. Inside service IMPL, what we'll do, student repository dot save the entity student. So we have the response, we saved it inside, and then we are saving it here, and we are returning the same thing to the front end. Now we will see the controller, student controller. We have it here, student controller. We will define a save method, public. We have something called as response entity. Response entity. What does this response entity mean? It represents the entire HTTP response. So we can give the status code, header, response body. It allows us to set the status code of the response. It allows us to customly change the address of the response. It allows us to set the body of the response. This represents the entire HTTP request. So here we will send student save students @post mapping, and we have /save student. Here we will take something called as request body. Request body, student response, then request, student request. Inside this, what we'll do, we will call the service. To call the service, we should auto-wire it. Student service, and then the rate auto-wired, and we'll do student service dot save student request. Student student equal to written response entity of student 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 comma http dot dot request http response http status dot okay. New response entity. So now we have the save method written end to end. So what we'll do, we will go to our Postman, add request. We will take this, put it here. Instead of this, we will write save student and we'll go to body and give it as raw JSON. And what is your response request? You will copy this, paste it here. First name is Kavya, Srinivasa, ages 34. You have this as post method. And now can we hit the service? Yes, right? Will it do? Not. Your application should be up and running. And one more thing was you are not supposed to auto hire a student here. You can do as student equal to new student. This is because we are not, we know when we require the student, right? That is why you have so now we'll see whether we can post. This is post request. Internal server error. Why it is internal? Invalid data access. Usage could not execute and doesn't exist. Insert into. Okay, we don't have a table in the database. Let's create it. We can add this Spring JPA Hibernate DDL auto. So whenever there is no table in the database, it will create automatically. Let's see whether it works now. So you can see that first entry has been done. So let's take one more minus 25 cent. Okay, you got to know like second entry is also been made. We'll go to the tables here, create refresh all. You can see that inside the database, when we execute this select query, we can see that we have two entries, that is Kavya and Mayu. So this is how we can save the data from the API request till the database. So in the further videos, we'll see how to put, delete and get all the entries. Thank you.